Have you ever wondered why your 20s can feel like the decade you're supposed to have everything figured out, yet somehow it becomes the decade where you feel the most lost? The strange part is that almost everyone around you is quietly pretending they know what they're doing while carrying the exact same uncertainty. You look at people your age building careers, finding love, traveling the world, or achieving milestones online, and without noticing, your mind begins measuring your life against carefully edited moments. Suddenly, every delay feels like failure, every wrong decision feels permanent, and every birthday feels like proof that you're falling behind. But psychology tells a completely different story. Your 20s are not designed to feel stable. They are designed to reshape your identity, challenge everything you thought you believed, and force your brain to question who you really are beneath expectations, comparisons, and fear. The uncomfortable emotions you're experiencing may not be signs that something is wrong with you at all. They may actually be evidence that your mind is developing exactly as it should. Once you understand the hidden psychological forces quietly shaping this decade, you'll begin seeing your struggles through an entirely different lens. And the first hidden force explains why so many people spend years chasing a life that was never truly theirs. If you've ever felt like you're running out of time, questioning every decision, or wondering why adulthood feels so much harder than you imagined, you're not alone. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your 20s often feel emotionally chaotic, why comparison seems impossible to escape, and how your mind can quietly work against your happiness without you even realizing it. More importantly, you'll learn how to stop fighting these experiences and start using them as stepping stones instead of obstacles. The truth is, most people don't struggle in their 20s because they're lazy, unintelligent, or incapable. They struggle because they're trying to build an identity while living in a world that constantly tells them who they should become. You're expected to succeed quickly, discover your passion, maintain relationships, stay healthy, earn more money, and somehow still feel confident every single day. That's an overwhelming psychological burden for anyone. Yet few people ever acknowledge it. There is nothing shameful about feeling uncertain. In fact, uncertainty is often a sign that your mind is expanding beyond the beliefs you inherited from childhood. Growth rarely feels comfortable while it's happening. The challenge isn't eliminating uncertainty, it's learning to navigate it without letting it define your self-worth. And that journey begins with understanding the invisible habit that quietly shapes almost every decision people make in their 20s. The greatest trap of your 20s is believing you have to become someone before you can finally feel worthy. That single belief quietly influences the careers you chase, the relationships you accept, and the standards you hold yourself to, often without you even noticing. Instead of asking what genuinely fulfills you, your mind starts asking what will earn approval. Psychologists describe this as the tension between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. When your decisions are driven mostly by external validation, your happiness becomes dependent on things you cannot fully control. A promotion, more followers, a prestigious job title, or constant praise may feel satisfying for a moment, but your brain quickly adapts and begins searching for the next achievement. This cycle is known as the hedonic treadmill, and research shows that lasting fulfillment usually comes from pursuing personally meaningful goals rather than endlessly chasing status. Think about someone choosing a career simply because it impresses family and friends. On paper, everything looks successful, yet every Monday feels heavier than the last, because the life they're building doesn't actually reflect who they are. What actually matters is creating a life that feels authentic instead of merely impressive. Progress becomes far more meaningful when it's aligned with your values rather than someone else's expectations. Ironically, the people who seem to have everything figured out are often just as confused. They've simply become better at looking confident while searching for the answers. And that leads to another psychological habit that quietly steals joy from almost everyone in their 20s. Comparison has never been easier, yet genuine self-understanding has never been harder. Every time you scroll through social media, your brain is collecting fragments of other people's lives and quietly stitching them together into a standard that no real human could ever meet. Without realizing it, you begin comparing your ordinary moments to everyone else's highlight reel. Psychologists call this social comparison theory. Our minds naturally evaluate our progress by looking at those around us, but the digital world has distorted that instinct. Instead of comparing ourselves with a handful of friends or colleagues, we're now measuring our lives against thousands of carefully curated success stories. Research consistently shows that excessive upward comparison is linked to lower self-esteem, increased anxiety, and reduced life satisfaction. Imagine finishing work after a productive day, only to open your phone and see someone your age announcing a new business, an engagement, a luxury holiday, or a dream home. Within seconds, your own achievements suddenly feel smaller, even though nothing about your life has actually changed. What actually matters is measuring your growth against the person you were yesterday, not against strangers whose struggles remain invisible. Real confidence develops from recognizing consistent progress, however small, rather than winning an imaginary race that keeps changing its finish line. And remember, the person posting a perfect morning routine probably spent 20 minutes deciding which coffee mug looked most inspirational. Meanwhile, the next psychological challenge is even quieter, because it happens entirely inside your own mind before anyone else ever sees it. Your 20s are often defined less by the decisions you make and more by the decisions you delay. Fear has a remarkable way of disguising itself as preparation. You tell yourself you'll apply when you're more qualified, start when you have more confidence, or speak up when the timing feels perfect. Yet that perfect moment rarely arrives. Psychologists refer to this as avoidance behavior. Your brain is designed to protect you from rejection, embarrassment, and failure, so it naturally encourages familiar routines instead of uncertain opportunities. The problem is that every avoided challenge temporarily reduces anxiety, teaching your brain that avoidance is the safest option. Over time, this creates a cycle where comfort expands while confidence quietly shrinks. Think about someone who dreams of launching a business but spends years researching instead of taking the first step. They aren't lacking intelligence or ambition. They're waiting to feel fearless before acting, not realizing that courage usually appears after action, not before it. What actually matters is accepting that growth almost always feels uncomfortable in the beginning. Confidence is built through repeated evidence that you can survive uncertainty, not by eliminating uncertainty altogether. Every small action becomes proof that you're more capable than your fears suggested. The funny thing is that your brain can convince you sending one email is as dangerous as climbing a mountain, yet somehow it's perfectly happy scrolling for another hour. And that's because the next challenge isn't just fear, it's the silent exhaustion caused by making too many decisions every single day. One of the most exhausting parts of your 20s is that almost everything feels like a life-defining choice. Should you change careers, move to a new city, stay in the relationship, go back to school, accept the offer? Every decision seems loaded with consequences, making even simple choices feel emotionally overwhelming. Psychologists call this decision fatigue. Your brain has a limited capacity for making thoughtful choices before mental energy begins to decline. The more decisions you face, the more likely you are to overthink, procrastinate, or choose whatever brings immediate relief instead of long-term fulfillment. Add the fear of making the wrong choice, and your mind becomes trapped in endless analysis. Picture someone spending weeks comparing every possible career path, reading countless opinions, and imagining every outcome. They believe more information will finally bring certainty, yet each new possibility only creates another reason to hesitate. Eventually, doing nothing feels easier than risking an imperfect decision. What actually matters is remembering that most decisions are not permanent verdicts on your future. They are simply directions that can be adjusted as you learn more about yourself. Progress usually comes from making thoughtful choices and adapting along the way, not from discovering a flawless path before you begin. Ironically, your brain can spend 3 hours deciding what to do with your life, then somehow choose dinner in 30 seconds, because hunger finally wins the argument. And that reveals another hidden truth about your 20s. The relationship you have with yourself quietly shapes every relationship you build with others. The relationships you build in your 20s often reveal more about your relationship with yourself than about anyone else. Many people believe they're simply unlucky in love or friendship, when in reality, they're repeating emotional patterns they learned long before adulthood. Without awareness, the familiar can feel safer than the healthy. Psychologists have found that our early experiences influence how we connect with others through what is known as attachment patterns. If you grew up feeling consistently supported, Trusting others may come naturally. But if love felt unpredictable or approval had to be earned, you may find yourself chasing unavailable people, avoiding vulnerability, or constantly worrying that you're not enough. Imagine staying in a friendship where you're always the one reaching out, making excuses for broken promises because losing the connection feels more frightening than accepting poor treatment. Or perhaps you silence your opinions in a relationship just to avoid conflict, believing peace is more important than honesty. What actually matters is recognizing that healthy relationships don't require you to shrink your personality or abandon your values. The right people won't expect you to earn your place through constant sacrifice. They create space for honesty, respect, and mutual growth, even when disagreements arise. It's funny how we'll ignore 10 red flags because someone sent one thoughtful text, then spend the rest of the week wondering why we're emotionally exhausted. The next lesson uncovers why the stories you tell yourself can quietly become the life you end up living. The most influential voice you'll hear in your 20s isn't your parents, your friends, or your boss. It's the quiet conversation happening inside your own mind every single day. That inner dialogue shapes your confidence long before your actions ever do. Yet most people never question whether it's actually telling the truth. Psychologists describe this as self-talk, and research in cognitive psychology shows that our thoughts are not always accurate reflections of reality. Your brain is constantly interpreting events, filling in missing information, and predicting future outcomes. When those interpretations become overly negative, they create cognitive distortions that make ordinary setbacks feel like proof that you're failing at life. Imagine making one mistake during a presentation at work. Instead of remembering the 99% that went well, your mind fixates on that single awkward moment. Hours later, you're convinced everyone thinks you're incompetent, even though most people barely noticed it happened. What actually matters is learning to separate facts from interpretations. A disappointing outcome doesn't define your identity, and one difficult season doesn't predict your future. The stories you repeatedly tell yourself eventually become the lens through which you experience your entire life. So they're worth examining instead of automatically believing. The strange thing is that your brain can remember one embarrassing moment from 5 years ago with perfect clarity, yet somehow forget where you left your keys this morning. And once you understand how your thoughts shape your reality, you're ready to discover the final lesson that ties everything together. Your 20s are often spent searching for certainty, but the people who grow the most aren't the ones who eliminate uncertainty. They're the ones who learn to live alongside it. One of the biggest psychological shifts into adulthood is realizing that confidence isn't something you discover before taking action. It's something you build because you keep taking action despite not knowing exactly how everything will turn out. Behavioral psychologists have long observed that repeated exposure to manageable challenges gradually reduces fear and increases resilience. Every time you face uncertainty, instead of avoiding it, your brain gathers new evidence that you are capable of adapting. This process strengthens psychological flexibility, a trait consistently associated with better mental well-being, healthier relationships, and greater life satisfaction. Think about someone who starts their first job feeling completely out of place. During the first week, every task feels intimidating. A few months later, the same responsibilities have become second nature, not because the work changed, but because they did. Growth happened so gradually that they almost missed it. What actually matters is trusting that you don't need a perfect plan to build a meaningful life. You need the willingness to keep learning, adjusting, and moving forward even when the destination isn't fully visible. Every experience, including the difficult ones, becomes part of the person you're becoming, rather than evidence that you're falling behind. The funny thing about adulthood is that nobody hands you a map. Most people are simply walking with confidence while secretly checking whether they're still on the right road. And perhaps that's the most reassuring truth of all. You're not behind. You've just begun the journey that teaches you who you really are. If there's one truth worth carrying with you after this conversation, it's that your 20s were never meant to be a decade of perfection. They are a decade of discovery. The confusion, mistakes, detours, and unanswered questions that feel so heavy today are often the very experiences shaping the wisdom you'll rely on for the rest of your life. You've seen how comparison distorts reality, how fear disguises itself as preparation, how overthinking steals momentum, how relationships reflect the way you see yourself, and how your inner voice quietly influences every decision you make. None of these psychological patterns exist to hold you back forever. They exist to be recognized, understood, and gradually transformed through awareness and consistent action. The goal isn't to wake up tomorrow with all the answers. It's to become the kind of person who trusts themselves enough to keep moving, even when the next chapter isn't perfectly clear. Real growth isn't measured by how quickly you reach your destination, but by the person you become while finding your way. Years from now, you probably won't remember every setback that feels overwhelming today. You'll remember the moments you chose courage over comfort, authenticity over approval, and progress over perfection. Those quiet decisions are the ones that shape an extraordinary life. If this video helped you see your 20s from a new perspective, consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your experience may be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and remember that you're not falling behind. You are becoming the person your future self will one day thank you for.